Folks, thank you so much for tuning in. As we know, those of you who follow day-to-day news, there is always news, and today is no exception. Everything from the King of England coming to the U.S. After being thrown out 250 years ago, to some pretty amazing stuff going on around the world and in Canada and in sports. We are just full of news. Some of it's good, some not so good. Usually we look at the international scene first as we start the podcast here, but I want to zero right in on the Canadian scene first because it's budget day in Canada, and you're going to be hearing hours from now some of the budget news from the Liberal point of view and from the media point of view, which people would say is the same. The thing about that we're already getting a heads up on that back in November, it was projected that there was going to be a deficit of 78 billion, and that watch for that number to come in quite a bit lower. Whether that's been a matter of someone cooking the books or whether it's reality, people will drill into that, but that's going to be coming in lower. You're going to see the effect of the budget on the last several months. There's been an increase in the price of oil, and because of taxes then that come from that, that always works out favorably in the budget. So we'll see how much of the deficit reduction is as a result of that. And it's being pointed out, the opposition leader Pierre Poilievre has pointed out, it's fine to say the deficit is lower, but it's not including the March numbers. And the month of March is usually when you see the highest government spending. It's called March Madness as departments rush to spend all the money that they've been given before the end of March rolls around, and that's part of the reason for the reduction in the deficit. Well, we'll wait and see. It's the first anniversary of the Prime Minister's election, so more to come on that. One thing I believe from just insights that we're getting early on out of the budget speech, a little more focus on introduction to and getting young people or anybody involved more in trades. And obviously that's a response to having people equipped to handling AI and the job displacement that comes with that. And the trades themselves will be somewhat less vulnerable to AI layoffs, and actually trades will be improved because of AI increase in technology. So probably a good move there. But the thing that's really got people interested is this sovereign wealth fund. It's the first time ever for Canada, and it's the first time there's a number of these funds around the world. For instance, Kuwait has a similar sovereign wealth fund, basically where the government sets up its government, so-called government dollars that go into it. Remember, government dollars are your dollars. This thing that politicians get, and it happens on all stripes, that they are graciously giving you some money. They're returning portions of the money they've taken from you. So keep that in mind, whatever party it is. But for instance, Kuwait has a sovereign fund. Singapore has a sovereign fund. Norway has a sovereign fund. Even the province of Alberta has a sovereign fund called the Heritage Savings and Trust Fund. The thing that's different from all these other funds around the world is it's surpluses that have gone to create those funds. And in Canada, Canada is building a fund, starting their fund with a deficit. So they're sticking borrowed money into what is called a sovereign wealth fund. Remember, I've always said, I continue to say, the single greatest cause of inflation is government spending borrowed dollars. Government spending borrowed dollars, GSBD, is the single reason. Even in Alaska, they have a fund where they simply pay back money every year to the people of Alaska. So this is the first time it's being tried where a government is starting a fund with borrowed money. It's going to sound somewhat safe for investors because small investors are going to be allowed to put into that. There's some criticism because investors, you and I, can already buy government bonds, which have a guaranteed yield to them. And so kind of what's the difference here? And the concern is that since it's a government fund, guess what? A new corporation has to be built. And they're building a new corporation just to oversee that fund. So you're going to have increased bureaucracy and the costs that go with that. So the jury is definitely out. There's also the concern that it becomes a government slush fund that would go to projects that just the government wants to see go ahead. So these are some of the concerns. And there already are some key projects around the country where the government, the federal Liberals, said they're going to move things quickly in terms of getting projects moving, but they are slowing down and they're in trouble. You know that we talked last week, one of the projects that's been approved, natural gas pipeline addition, it's called the Sunrise Project. It's a $4 billion expansion to an existing line. So that's taken place, but the big one, it's called the West Coast Pipeline, which was going to be bringing, and the plan was to bring refined oil to the coast to ship around the world, principally China, to get China off of its coal plants, to ship to India, to help India reduce the millions of tons of dung that is burned at the commercial level for home heating and home cooking. So Enbridge has commented on that because six First Nations groups have been very strong. They've delivered letters to all of the people and the government departments involved saying we will protest any expansion of refined oil products to the coast. We'll fight that all the way. And of course, you know what that means. That could mean protests. It could mean blockages. It could mean blockades. Enbridge has already announced that really there's no sane company in the world that would invest in something that is being so highly threatened right at the beginning. So real concerns there, even though the Prime Minister and the Premier of Alberta have agreed that particular pipeline should go ahead. Unfortunately, and especially now in the day where Iranian oil is being blocked and there's such a reduction worldwide, Canada and Alberta and BC could be answers to the worldwide problem of skyrocketing oil and gas prices. And this oil could be an answer to reducing emissions around the world and to taking the pressure off. But the six First Nations groups are opposing it. Keep in mind, there are other First Nations groups who aren't opposing that pipeline. So it's unfortunate to see. One thing to keep in mind, the First Nations groups are mainly opposing it because they say it would, it could be a possible, you could have a situation where you have an accident with one of these tankers. Yes, that's of course always possible. Keep in mind the statistics on this. Satellites show that at any given time, on any given day, like today itself, the entire fleet around the world from all countries of oil tankers of various sizes, there's about 7,000 to 8,000 tankers in that fleet. About 70% of the entire oil tanker fleet around the world is operating and is floating out there on the high seas on any given day. That means there's about 5,000 oil tankers on any given day of the year that are transporting oil. That means if you take that on a yearly basis, that means 1.8 million tanker days per year. 1.8 million tanker days per year of oil, and very few, very rare with the increased safety that is provided, do you hear of an accident. It can happen, but it's very rare, and even rarer now with all of the precautions that are being taken. So on that extreme rare case of something happening, it could happen, but it's very rare, we are really holding hostage the world, a world that is still addicted to coal, is still addicted to dung. Alberta and Canada could be solving that problem, and the royalties that come from that would be going to First Nations bands and First Nations employment, First Nations jobs. So I, for one, am very disappointed that these six First Nation bands are opposing many other First Nations bands that want to see this go ahead. And this is unfortunate. Meanwhile, let's look at another area of where public policy is causing problems. Been reports today out of Toronto that home invasions in Toronto are at a 10-year high. And this is not unique to Toronto. It's the same in Western Canada. And so we hear there are many, it's a multifaceted problem, but allowing bail to happen for people who break into homes. These are violent. People say, well, it's a home invasion, nobody was injured. If you've ever had your home invaded, as we have, I can tell you, We had a home invasion. We weren't there. We missed it by minutes. We came home, and whoever broke into the home jumped out the back window. That affected my wife. It still does after years. The fact that somebody was in the home, and what would have happened if it had just been she coming home there and being alone with whoever was there. Home invasions are not victimless crimes. They are violent emotionally, if not physically. And the federal Liberal government continues to have this very slack policy. The few times we're able to capture these creeps who would break into your home, nothing happens, hardly anything happens. They're released in a turnstile. They go right back into the community, and police officers tell us there's a tiny percentage of the community, a tiny percentage, they can almost by name tell you when certain home invaders are out of jail, because immediately it goes up, and these people who are habitual home invaders need to be kept and incarcerated and not unleashed on the community. But the federal Liberals and the judges they appoint continue to cause this to be a problem. You know, this has the effects on city budgets also. I just want to take a minute to talk about city budgets, because municipal elections are coming up in the fall in many jurisdictions, most jurisdictions across the country. So just using as an example, in the beautiful town of Clearwater in British Columbia, and I'm not picking on the town there, I'm not picking on the mayor or the councillors, but they've announced a 10%, there's going to be a 10% tax increase. And the mayor's saying you can't keep kicking the can down the road. You got to have a 10% tax increase. Folks, increasing taxes is the least intellectual, the least intelligent way to bring in revenue, whether you're talking about a city, a province, a state, or a nation. And now I have some sympathy for the mayor there. There is some inflation that's caused by federal overspending. I agree with that. But the mayor is honest enough also to say half of the inflation is going to the increase in staff wages. And so one thing, when you're going into the elections and you're doing your voting, are you asking your mayor and councillor in a time when AI can provide so many efficiencies at City Hall? You don't have to go to City Hall and fire everybody. You don't have to do that at all. Just let natural attrition, natural retirement take its place. It happens at a rate of anywhere from 6% to 11% a year, depending on the municipality. And ask the question, you don't have to fire people, but why are you replacing people when we have incredibly enhanced ways for jobs to get done? You need to be asking these questions of your mayors. If you think 10% was a lot in Osoyoos, British Columbia, by the way, Clearwater was a brand new municipality in 2007, and already they're racking up this kind of debt. And by the way, the mayor said, and I'm not jumping on the mayor. This is just the politicians get influenced by their administrators. And the mayor said there's going to be a one-time tax increase. I don't think there has been in the history of taxation ever a one-time increase. Very rare if it ever happens. Remember when the income tax was brought into Canada as a result of trying to help the First World War effort. It was brought in at 1%. That was going to be 1% of your income tax during the debate. Somebody got up and said, we can't even bring it in at 1% because, trust me, if we have a 1% tax on income, someday some governments will raise that to 3% tax on your income. And they laughed the guy out of the place. They said no government would ever be so audacious as to hit people with a 3% increase. So a one-time tax increase doesn't happen. Folks in Osoyoos, which is also another municipality in British Columbia, and great people there, and I'm not dumping on the mayor and councillors, but for them, they said there's going to be a 39% increase. Everybody went berserk, and so they've come back and they said, okay, it's only going to be 24%. This is a common tactic that is given to city administrators, to the mayor and councillors. Come in announcing, saying, it looks like it's going to be this, maybe a 10% increase. Everybody goes berserk, all the citizens, and then they say, we worked really hard for the last several weeks and we've got it down to only a 6% increase. Don't fall for that. Demand tougher budgets and demand more open budgets. Well, Alberta, in terms of legislation in the House of Commons right now, the medically assisted dying, so-called legislation. Alberta now has announced, and they're the only province that's announcing there are some restraints on this. As you know, this legislation, as many of us predicted years ago, has gone wide open. It's not just people who are facing imminent death. We said the time would come when people would be nuked for emotional pain, emotional distress, and that young people, we get younger and younger. All of that has transpired. And you have major media agencies like the CBC that are always pushing for people being sympathetic to increase the reasons why somebody can be taken out. And Alberta has put limits on this, the only province that has. So congratulations to them for doing it. And just going back to the homeless problem, and I want to bring to your attention something that's happening in Winnipeg, but not just Winnipeg. What politicians are doing, as citizens are increasingly, they get upset when they see so many so-called homeless people on the streets, tent encampments, violence on the street, all these things increasing. So what cities are doing is they're just shoving people they're buying up buildings and they're sticking people in these buildings, and it looks like the problems have gone away because it's for a little while there's less people on the streets, but it's not dealing with the problem. In Winnipeg, there are reports that are just out yesterday and today. The Canadian Polish Manor, which is a facility for seniors and also for people on limited income, they're able to stay there and only have to pay 30% of whatever income they're making to stay in there. And increasingly, the province is putting so-called homeless people in there, and the problems that have arisen, drunkenness in the place, drugs being used, situations where copper wire is being torn out of the wall, copper wire that would go to obviously providing the electricity in the place. Some of the TV screens in the public areas have disappeared. There's needles that are found. The residents got a memo from the management saying, oh, by the way, feel free to report any cases of prostitution or the use of firearms. This is in a facility that had been a wonderful facility where even one of the women there who has a part-time, supports herself by doing sewing in one of the public rooms there. She can't go in there. It's too dangerous. And again, governments are not being held to account. You need to, citizens, you need to rise up, speak up, and support the governments and those politicians who will deal with policies that look for reduction of crime, that gets away from these insane so-called safe injection sites. Harm reduction sites are not harm reduction. They increase the harm. And folks, you have to rise up and vote accordingly. Demand from people who are running for office, whether it's municipal, state, provincial, or national, what they're going to do in this regard. These problems can be fixed. We see great reductions in crime where the proper approaches are taken. But it's not going to happen unless you vote in the correct people. Well, talking about talking about the correct people, the King and Queen of England, of the United Kingdom, visiting the United States, helping them. They've been invited there with the 250th anniversary. Remember, this is the 250th anniversary in the U.S. of the King being booted out of the colonies, being booted out of the Americas. So all eyes are on the visit that'll be taking place. It's going to be a little bit tense there. There's going to be, people are watching with interest because the UK is not the King and Queen, but the UK have announced they don't want to help to keep the Strait of Hormuz protected. This is the Strait of Hormuz. It mainly is a help to the Middle East and to Europe. And the United States is taking all the pressure of keeping that open. So a little bit of concern and a little bit of pushback there when the U.S. and to a degree, of course, Canada, saying to the U.K. and to Europe, you know, we helped you in the First World War, we helped you in the Second World War, and now you are bailing out and not having much of an influence, not wanting to get involved in keeping the Strait of Hormuz open. So we'll see what happens over the next 4 days. It's going to be a great time. And the King presenting to the joint Congress, that's to the Senate and to the House of Representatives, only the second time in history that has happened. And guess who was the first one to do that? His mom. Queen Elizabeth, back in 91, was the first one to address a joint session. So watch for that happening. I want to give a nod out here, or a nod up, or a thumbs up to the women's professional hockey team in Vancouver, the Gold Eyes. They have led the league as the league closes out, even though they didn't make the playoffs. They had a great season attendance-wise. They averaged 11.2 thousand fans per game. It's the highest in the league, I believe. And even though they got bounced out of the playoffs, it gives them first shot at the draft. So good for the women team in Vancouver. Now, in Iran, the game of chicken continues to be applied. The Iranian regime, which seems to be splitting, seems to be fracturing internally, they're saying that the U.S. will cave first, the U.S. will retreat, and the Iranians will once again be allowed to increase their nuclear program and control the Strait of Hormuz. And President Trump saying, no, ain't going to happen. They've got lots of time. He says he's going to be patient. And it's estimated now that within 12 days, the country of Iran will run out of place. There'll be no place for them to store their own oil. And we'll see that the other part of the game of chicken is how this is affecting, of course, the worldwide prices of oil and gas products. Jet fuel, for instance, has gone from, I'll use the U.S. Metric here, $2.50 a gallon to $4.19. That's putting lots of pressure, especially on the small budget airlines. And again, the Iranian Islamist regime is hoping that these commercial pressures will cause the U.S. to cave first. But in a surprise move, and this is stunning and not getting a lot of coverage, as you know, there's a group called APEC. These are oil producing companies, countries. There's about 12 to 13 of them, depending on what year you're looking at them. They really have a controlling effect on both the quantity and the price of oil as it comes from the Middle East. And the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, have pulled out of OPEC. This is rather a surprise move. That means OPEC will not be able to control not just the price, but the volume of oil that's out there in the world. That generally will mean a reduction in prices worldwide. There'll be volatility, but you have more oil available around the world, means a reduction in prices for you and me. Slight maybe, but some reduction. That's the good news. And the bad news is countries like Canada, which rely heavily on the royalties that come from oil and gas, and even provinces like Alberta that rely quite heavily on the royalties that come from the taxes that come from oil and gas. If gas and oil prices drop, that means less taxes for government. Guess what? That means governments are just going to have to work harder at keeping their spending down and running smooth operations. The UAE, it makes up about 15% of the oil that comes out of the OPEC countries. So watch for developments there. There's ongoing discussion, of course, about the assassination attempt that took place over the weekend in the U.S. in Washington. And you know what is bothering is the amount of time that this creep, this lunatic, and I'm saying that unashamedly and unhesitantly, anybody who plans to kill people for political purposes is a lunatic. And media reads out this lunatic's manifesto as if he's some kind of normal thinking person. And I'll tell you what's really changed over the years, because I'm young enough to remember, of course, I was a kid when John F. Kennedy was assassinated. I can tell you on the left and on the right, whether it's politicians or whether it's the pundits, there was zero sympathy for the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And that has changed. The social milieu has changed. You actually have people from comedians to politicians to news sources almost having sympathy for these insane nutbar lunatics. That's what they are. They have to be seen as that. The sooner he can properly be found and proved to be fully guilty, the sooner he needs to be dealt with in the most severe way which the law would allow. And you match that, these lunatics who do these assassins, they have to be projected as that, because if they're not, they see themselves kind of as Robin Hood type folk heroes, and they have to be denounced right across the board, or you're going to see an ongoing increase in this lunatic activity. The language they use, that language, the things that they are calling Trump, only inflame other lunatics out there who would love to also get there. It's far more 15 minutes of fame It can be 15 days or 15 years of fame. And that's not helped by the equally lunatic approaches of people like Jimmy Kimmel. If you heard what he had to say, I don't even want to repeat it, relative to the First Lady, to Melania Trump, and being an expectant widow. I don't know, folks, I try to stay calm. That is scum level. The level of scum that a so-called comedian would slide to in terms of going after the First Lady like this and putting, again, lunatic ideas into the insane minds of lunatics that are out there. If you watch Jimmy Kimmel, as I don't, I go with the reports and then I click in to see if it was true, you're actually supporting his ratings and you're actually helping his minimal success. He's actually not that funny a guy. So you need to think about that. There needs to be, you know that I'm one of the fiercest champions of freedom of speech, but when it gets to that disgusting level, I just have very little tolerance. Let me change the tone a bit. Bill Belichick, who was a hero of mine for all the years that he was the coach of the New England Patriots, and he and Tom Brady, as you remember when Tom Brady was quarterback, just a record number of Super Bowls, loved the guy. And in 2023, he left New England. Brady had left, looked like they weren't going to be on the same streak. Took a job coaching at the University of North Carolina. He wanted to show and demonstrate he could also be a success. And about the same time, of course, his wife had tragically passed away a few years earlier, and he's hooked up with, and forgive me, I forget the actual legal status of the relationship. I'm not being negative there, but Janet Hudson, very, very much younger than Bill. And of course, he takes a lot of abuse for that. And he shows up at Coachella, at the Stagecoach Music Festival. This is the one that follows Coachella. And people show up there to be seen and everything. And people are kind of laughing at him because he was casually dressed, had the hoodie on, and he's kind of smiling at them all. So anyway, Coach Bill taking a little bit of flack there. I think probably some of it from some of the media is probably envy more than anybody else. But a guy who isn't being envied right now, who's being charged and indicted by the Federal Department of Justice in the States, a guy by the name of David Morenz. Some of you may remember him. He was Anthony Fauci's main advisor, and he's being charged. It's been found that he was using his private emails to hide discussions that he was having and that Fauci was having with China. And talking about elements related to the Wuhan Institute of Technology, the Wuhan lab. He was hiding that from public view. He's been indicted. He's also, they're also including receiving of various gifts and grants. So Fauci's top advisor running into trouble there. Well, to make it a happier, slightly happier tone here, closing out on the sports side, if you follow the Kentucky Derby, which is coming up on Saturday, there's a real emotional vibe to it this year because the horse known as So Happy, this is a come from behind horse in terms of just in terms of the bloodline and the parent line. When you trace it out, it's quite a remarkable story. And So Happy won at the San Vicente Stakes in January. That was a big race, propelled him on. Now he's going to be in the Kentucky Derby, and kind of a heartbreak story there because, first of all, the owners, the Glatts, Dina Glatt and her husband Mark is actually the trainer, very excited that their horse won. And Dina Glatt, only 57 years old, died suddenly of a heart attack the month after their horse won that big race in January. So a sad story there. The jockey is Mike Smith. He's 60 years old. If he wins, he'll be the oldest Kentucky Derby winner ever. Willie Schumacher was 54 and has the record there. So a real emotional time coming in. He could be the emotional favorite. Whether he'll be the actual winner, we don't know. And talking about the other end of the age spectrum, I like to keep you going and somewhat informed on some of what's happening with the Gen Zs. So in The Guardian, there's a report that influencers now, some of the major influencers of Gen Z, skincare products for preteens. And this is the 13-year-old influencer, a 13-year-old influencer really being used by companies to push out skincare products for preteens as this it just doesn't seem to be going away, this insatiable desire to be looking at ourselves close up. I look at myself close up on this screen, and I think maybe I could use some of that skin product. So you can decide whether that's a concern or not, but it does speak to the anxiety level among Gen Z, Gen Z, about how they look all the time. Well, if you've heard of Chelsea Park Goals, she was responsible, huge influencer and product lines and fashion line for the Park sweatshirt or the Park hoodie, Parke, and those would retail because of her influence, and especially among Gen Z, Gen Z, and millennials. That would normally sell for around $130 to $200 for that particular sweatshirt or hoodie. And now they've made shows that if you become successful as an influencer, you can be multi-millionaire, because Target has now joined with Park, and you can now grab those hoodies and sweatshirts for $40. So look what happens when you really go viral and really make it out there. Just to keep you informed, parents and grandparents, of some of the terms you may see which you don't understand. Do you know what it means if you've been mogged? Do you know what it means to mog somebody? It's actual part of an abbreviation. It stands for alpha male of group, mog. Mogging means if you are in a picture with somebody or in a scene or on a social network, and you're standing beside or with someone, and you really sort of outshine them in terms of you look, it's principally a male term, you look way better than they do. You're just, outshine them in every way, then that means you're mogging them. If you're in a picture and there's somebody beside you or near you, if you're a guy and the guy is looking cosmetically just way better than you are, you've just been mogged. Well, somebody who's not mogged, the Pope, for the first time, looking and meeting with and having a moment of prayer, a prayer service with the Archbishop of Canterbury, and that is for the first time in history. That is a woman, Sarah Mullally, and they met. They actually had prayer together. This is the Anglican Church and the Catholic Church. Now, I'll say part of the Anglican Church, because a lot of the Anglican Church has moved away because of the relaxation among the Anglican Church in terms of their view of same-sex marriage, transgendering, etc., being much more liberal. And the Pope, as we've noted even yesterday in his trip to Africa, he seems to be backing off on some of the clear definitions there. Anyway, they had their time of prayer. They still got some issues because, of course, in the Catholic Church, they don't ordain priests, and now you've got Sarah Mullally, first time ever, you've got an Anglican priest who's head of the situation for the Anglicans. So there, I'll let you decide whether this is a good drawing together and good thing for people, or whether we need to be praying more. I'll leave that up to you folks. Thanks for tuning in. See you tomorrow.